Well, sisters, brothers, and everybody in between, let me get the mic on. Can you hear me now? All right. Oh, I want to thank y'all for believing that we could pull this off. Our conference on reproductive justice futurism. My name is Loretta Ross, and I am an associate professor here at Smith College in the program for the study of women, gender, and sexuality.
Hello, hello, good morning. So good to be in community with all of you. My name is Jallicia Jolly, and I'm in the program of, well, in the Department of American Studies and Black Studies at Amherst College.
And we didn't coordinate this, but we were both wearing black and white.
Look at us go.
When you got a partner, it shows up in all of these mysterious
It's
ways.
good to be in alignment.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that reproductive justice futurism is about hope. It's always about our belief in the future and our belief that things will be better in the future. It's way beyond our dreams. It is what can we do now to make these dreams of tomorrow possible? And how can we make it not only better for ourselves, but for our descendants? I get asked all the time by people in my classes, why should I have to struggle against white supremacy and fascism and stuff like that? I'm tired. I'm tired of taking all that stuff on. And I tell them, you don't have to fight it. It's a choice, right? But remember the chain of freedom. The chain of freedom stretches back towards your ancestors that we just called into the room. And it stretches forward towards your descendants for whom we're working to build a brighter future for. Your only job right now is to make sure that chain doesn't break at your link. You don't have to fight it, but keep in mind that that chain can break at your link if you choose not to. You know? So you don't have to do it. You can refuse the privilege of telling white folks about white supremacy. You don't have to do that. But keep in mind that you get to say things to white people that would have gotten your parents and grandparents lynched. Mm. That is a privilege right now and should be read that way. So let me just keep running my mouth because I will. Even as we're having this conference, 2 weeks from now, there is a pro-natalist conference being put together by eugenicists down in Texas. And if you like, we're going to share the article with you that's in The Guardian about this. They are literally saying that they want to resurrect eugenics, that they believe that only privileged, heteronormative white people deserve to even be part of the future. And it's being put together by a group that some of you may recognize, the University of Texas at Austin, which is a fake university, because this is that university that people who said that colleges were too liberal decided to start about 4 or 5 years ago. People like Barry Weiss, who used to be with the New York Times and all of that, they consider themselves heterodox, but they really consider themselves anti-woke. And so they're having a pro-natalist conference. And so they're making plans while we're trying to catch up. Because we have been so obsessed with these fights from the 19th century over abortion, over the 14th Amendment, over the ending of white supremacy. All of these things we have been preoccupied with meant that we have not paid sufficient attention to what's going on down the road in the 21st century. And so this is where we are. But we know as black women we can never assume that structural racism and sexism will disappear no matter what the technology says, no matter what the technology promises. We believe that we have to actively work to deconstruct these systems. not magically hope they'll go away just because we get better toys. That's not going to happen. And so I guess I want to shut up because I want to save enough time for both Jallicia to say stuff. Because I wrote out a whole bunch of stuff I could say, but we've got such a kick-ass lineup for y'all. I'm telling you that I don't have to worry about what I need to say because we've got experts here to say it. And I just want to thank y'all. First of all, are there logistical things that we need to tell people? You can see that the food's downstairs, the bathroom's down the hall, right? The altar's that away, and all of this is being live streamed. I hope all of you signed media releases when you came in. If you did not, go back downstairs and do so. So, Jallicia?
What's the hashtag, Jallicia?
What's the hashtag, Janae? Thank you for passing the mic, but I'm gonna actually ask the group, do we want to hear the notes that Loretta had before we dive in? Because I'm like, we want to hear the wisdom. Okay, I just want to emphasize that part of this moment is the intergenerational aspect of this transmission, right? And when we plan this and conceive this, we emphasize both the past torching, but this important collaborative dialogue. So I don't want to cut you short. We don't want to do that. We want to give you space to drop it like it hot, to drop those notes. And then when you are finished dropping wisdom, then I'm happy to, take the mic and contextualize our opening. But we want to hear what you have to say, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to check the program because, when you talk to a professional talker.
We have time, 9:30.
Loretta, let's hear if you have any questions.
Yeah. Do we have any logistic questions? Pick up a mic and tell people.
Hello, welcome everyone.
This is Jeanette.
Welcome, thank you. So we have the butcher paper on the table, notes, what plenary you have questions or comments about, please put them on the paper. Put your name on the paper so this is memorialized, and if you have questions, please feel free to ask me. That, I think, is the extent of the logistics. All right.
Bathrooms and lunch. Tell us those.
Bathrooms, there are bathrooms. This way is the ladies' room. There are other bathrooms available. I'm not exactly sure where. I apologize.
They're all the way down there.
And then we'll be having lunch here. We'll be having lunch here today, and then there is a cocktail reception this evening.
Okay.
All right, so that's for today. We'll do tomorrow.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you can give about 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I wanted to bring people's attention to, and come on in. You ain't got to stand in the hall. Come on in. Is how the conflation of abortion with reproductive technologies has meant that we are not regulating or even know that we should be regulating some of the assisted reproductive technologies now because it's become like a third rail. Nobody wants to talk about what happens to frozen embryos that aren't used, for example, because then you got the anti-abortion movement saying that's life. We can't do anything with them except bear them, let them be born. But nobody's talking about, well, if that happens, who's going to take care of them? We got a government that don't even want to take care of the children who are here. What about all of this potential life that they want to bring about? And so we don't have any strong boundaries between biomedical research, the commercialization of fertility, right now with the egg donations and things like that. And this stuff is largely unmonitored and unregulated. Again, Emily and Crystal and others will go into this much more detail. There's very little regard for the protection of mothers who are using reproductive technologies, almost as if they're just incubators. And so there's a lot of violations of human rights that's taking place by there. One of the other concerns that I think is very important is that historically we're used to the right wing of America supporting eugenics, supporting the illegal sterilization of black women, Native American women, Latinas, on, and particularly people who are disabled or queer and all of that. But all of a sudden, they are now switching sides and say they're the opponents of eugenics, which is not true, by the way. But this is their rebranding campaign and accusing the left of being the ones that's trying to destroy the human race and the human population, all around this white great replacement theory that they are pushing. How are we going to handle that rebranding when we know their motives and their beliefs in white supremacy have not changed? You know, I even heard one woman, a black woman, Alveda King, the niece of Dr. King, said that when you support abortion, you're supporting reproductive racism. How are you supposed to handle that? Right? And those are the kind of things. And then the fact that the commercialization is taking advantage of the privileged and entitled desperation to have children, you know, which doesn't even interrogate biological determination, because does your right to parent have to be expressed through your own DNA and biology? It's not even addressing all the children in foster care who need parents. So if it was just about the right to parent, why is it being expressed in such a patriarchal way? And are we examining that? So those are some of my thoughts. And, you know, right now, this resurrection of scientific racism that we're dealing with, calling itself pronatalism, is something that I think we need to keep a very careful eye on. The way that they are using technology to deselect for certain characteristics, which is absolute bullshit, because you cannot screen for a child's IQ. You can't screen for a child's tendency towards criminality. But they're claiming that they can do that. And they're making rich and entitled people pay a whole lot of money under that assumption. And if they only knew how many rich, entitled assholes I know. And I just close because one person has written this line that I think is worth repeating. As the technology is invested in enhancing the genes of certain people, they actually are saying that we're going to end up with two types of human beings, the gene rich and the gene normal. And I think the pundit said, eventually, the gene rich will have as little interest in having sex with the gene normal as human beings today are interested in having sex with gorillas.
Wow.
This is the future.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, this is the future they want. So let me shut up, pass the torch. Thank y'all for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Loretta. Y'all look beautiful from this angle. Y'all look beautiful from all angles, but certainly. I wanted to give a little bit of the origin story for how this idea came up. It was during a car ride to Cambridge. We were attending, you remember that? That was last year? Wow.
Yeah, that thing at Radcliffe
That
with,
was just a year ago. Okay.
with
Yeah, Natalia Kanem and a few other leaders in global health, they were honoring Partners in Health on Radcliffe Day. Good to see you, Marlene. They were honoring Partners in Health for Radcliffe Day, and as we attended, well, one, I had the privilege and opportunity to meet Natalia Kanem and learn more about the transnational feminist, Black feminist history and organizing around reproductive health rights and justice. And on our way back from the car ride, we were processing just kind of the dominant conversations beyond the wonderful panel that Dr. Natalia Kanem was on. And one of the things that came up for us was just the ways in which the day was honoring women in global health leadership. And often the framing implicitly seemed to be white women in global health leadership. And there were many conversations that we were having in the car ride just around what it meant to, engage a global health that typically disengages the lived experiences and needs of historically marginalized groups, or Black women's leadership, or the leadership of people in the global South in meaningful ways, with a few examples. And also we wanted to kind of think about how do we engage a space like this, but think about sustainable, actionable strategies. So this is where the idea came about, and we wanted to think intentionally about how to connect what's happening in the U.S. to a broader space beyond the United States borders. So I open with a few brief remarks. We are alive in some amazing and intense times where the urgency for structural change and societal transformation meet the realities of violent backlash and white supremacist violence. Times where the attacks against basic human rights and reproductive freedom meet the growing calls for sustained RJ in action. Times that call us to confront white reproductive nationalism, um, to continue to confront white reproductive nationalism using Black feminist legacies of collective mobilizing in action, coalition, and community building and justice in practice. And it is our Black feminist visions of justice that meet our moment with purposeful and vibrant intention. And so we know that dominant narratives embody both Black women's erasures of the erasure of Black women's lives, needs, and contributions, as they also sustain the suffocating devaluation of all lives, particularly those relegated to the margins. And we see this as we see discussions, as Loretta mentioned, of pro-natalist agendas that combat the so-called demographic threat of declining birth rates by justifying infringement on bodily autonomy. We see this as we see the reinforcement of moral panics about fertility crises and declining sperm counts rooted in calls for population control and racial hygiene. We see this as we see the weaponization of vitro fertilization by anti-abortion strategists and legislators and their rhetoric, their laws, their litigation that connect abortion to the concept of fetal personhood, to subject care providers to criminal and civil sanctions. And we also see the enshrinement of white privilege and white purity alongside institutional violence, not limited to the US, but across the global South, which is part of the conversations we were trying to make in that car ride. We see this as we see the rollout of multi-purpose prevention technologies, NPTs, and an innovative approach for expanding combined pregnancy and or disease prevention, meet the ongoing attacks on global health and foreign aid that have undermined USAID-supported HIV prevention and reproductive health services. And we see this as we see young Black South African women, for example, become newly tapped resources of a multi-billion-dollar market for reproductive services, which raises multiple concerns that are, ethical, economic implications of the market. So this brings us to the purpose of the convening. This is the space in which a reproductive justice futurism convening of this kind emerges. And it enters to build an interdisciplinary, intersectional, forward-thinking framework for this movement. And we really solidify the convening's agenda through a series of conversations with our planning committee. Planning committee, raise your hand. Raise your hand. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And these are an intergenerational, multiracial group of leaders in reproductive justice, birth justice, racial justice, gender justice, human rights, all of us coming together over these last few months since we met in person in July to examine genetic and reproductive technologies using a Black feminist lens. So shout out to our planning committee again. And we part of the goal of this convening is to build collective power while anticipating new theories and practices, to create advocacy for policy around reproductive technologies, community education, mutual aid opportunities, avenues for creative collaboration. So connect, exchange numbers, IG accounts, Twitter, not Twitter, we don't claim that. And blue sky, brown sky, all the spaces. As we gather to recognize the uncontainability of knowledge and technologies, we are convening to ask how communities can control these technologies once they exist, and what controls are ethically responsible. And we really want to anchor this in a strategic vision that's forward thinking, that's interdisciplinary, that's intersectional, and importantly intergenerational, as we're trying to make these active bridges beyond academia, but between academia and communities. So the time has been here to update the work that we're doing and to really think about what it means in this context, and especially to think about the ways us as educators, practitioners work with the current and next generation to really fuel this intergenerational knowledge transmission. So it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to learn from you, Loretta. It has always been since I met you when I was 19 at Williams. And it is, during my sophomore year, and it is an honor to share space with both the people on the committee as well as the attendees, new and old, and to develop these connections. So we're looking forward to an imaginative, enjoyable, pleasurable gathering. And as Loretta likes to remind us, fighting fascists should be fun. So we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna have some fun.
All right. And I just wanted to bring back into the room how iterative and creative it was 31 years ago when 12 Black women created the theory of reproductive justice. And I was just lucky enough to be in that room when it happened. And the way that we imagined a new way to talk about reproductive politics was to center ourselves in the lens. Mm-hmm. What did we need from healthcare reform at the time? And once we did that, we realized that we had to go beyond the typical pro-choice, pro-life framing, only starting with the pregnancy. Because we wanted to go upstream and say, wait a moment, we're black women. We are already prevented from having the children that we want to have through sterilization, abuse, lack of health care, blah, blah, blah. So the right to have a child is as strong for us as the right not to have a child is as strong for the pro-choice movement. And neither the pro-choice nor the pro-life wings of that debate deal sufficiently with what happens to the child once the child is born. You know, it's just like, well, now that you had the baby, now you're on your own kind of thinking. And so that's where we were 31 years ago. And I think reproductive justice was a very transformative framework for its time. But now we have to upgrade and update reproductive justice to look at how does reproductive justice relate to the advances of science and technology? We haven't had that conversation yet. Yeah. What does the right to parent mean if it also involves exploitation of somebody else? We haven't had that conversation yet, right? We haven't even really talked about all the human rights violations that are present in our system of inequality that have a negative impact on people achieving reproductive justice, like the rounding up of immigrants right now. You know, that's the fear of facing an immigration raid is going to keep a pregnant person from going to the hospital for prenatal care, which of course is going to lead to poor birth rate, poor birth outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. So reproductive justice has to be nimble, it has to be expansive, it has to be adaptable to deal with these 21st century challenges. Some of them are old, but some of them are new. And so that was our thinking behind this conference, this think tank. I also wanted to just lay out 3 guiding questions that we're using for this whole think tank. What do we know about reproductive and genomic technology? What do we need to know? Where more do we need to know? And who most needs to know this information? And we define that as the most vulnerable people. Those are our guiding questions for everything that proceeds over this next 3 days. Again, as you can see, the last question centers the most vulnerable people in the conversation. Okay?